Who do you know? Who do you meet after work for a beer? What schools did you go to? It's all of those traditional ways of doing business within the real estate industry. And that's actually quite helpful within the real estate industry because that does help manage risk. You're working with trusted networks and trusted people. Unfortunately, that does not work with technology. The first reason it doesn't work is that if you are needed to purchase a technology solution, that solution could exist anywhere in the world. My main thread on procurement of tech in real estate is about risk. And that's risk for the real estate company, it's risk for the technology company, and it's risk for the people involved in the process.
All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Monk Realty Show. Today, we have with us Eddie from Unissu, which is a PropTech procurement platform. I've been an avid user of Unissu for many years now, and it's great to have him on with us today. Eddie, thank you so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure, AJ. Thank you very much for having me, and it's great. I think I must have been speaking to you guys at the House Monk from the very earliest days, so obviously things are going well, and congratulations for all of your growth. And I hope you don't mind, I invited a couple of my colleagues to join the call. Yeah. They may have something useful to shout about. They won't ask for permission. I can only apologize if it's not helpful.
No, the more the merrier. Who are your friends who joined us today?
This is Musto and Hamish, who are so bored of video calls by now, they don't even respond to their name. Come on, you, come in. Oh, there we go. That's Musto. Good boy. Right, we're going to talk about Musto. Good lad.
They must be hearing so much more about PropTech than the average listener here today.
Yes, they are the world's leading dog PropTech experts.
Oh man, that's fantastic. So as you've said, we've kind of known each other, and what we've both been building for a few years now. But for the other audience of the show who might not know what Unissu does, why don't you just give them a quick introduction about the company?
Yeah, so very specifically, Unissu's role in the market today is to help buyers and sellers do business together more effectively, and we do that by aggregating all of the buyers who are buying PropTech solutions across the world and bringing them together in one place on the Unissu platform. We then make those available to PropTech companies to access, which at the very simplest level helps with market intelligence and understanding about what's happening in the market, and hopefully at the bottom of the sales funnel results in some business for them as well. So that's what we do today. And that service is kind of wrapped in our mission, which has evolved. Well, the mission has stayed the same, but the offering has evolved, which is to bring together the buyers and sellers of technology and real estate and to help them do business more effectively. So our platform on a wider view offers lots of educational resources, networking resources, things to help grease the wheels of commerce, if you like. But very much the focus is on sales leads at Unissu today.
That's a really interesting introduction. Would love to know, from your learning so far, how has the journey been from a community building perspective? Because early on when I used to use Unissu, right, the early use cases were really around, can I find other founders and other PropTech startups just so that we can kind of exchange intelligence, right? So it was kind of like a LinkedIn or a Facebook, but only for real estate and PropTech. So how has the journey been from a community development perspective?
Well, thanks to the crazy early adopters like you and others of your ilk who are founders in tech companies, building the community amongst PropTech was relatively straightforward. As you know, my co-founder in the business, James Dearsley, has also been around this topic for a long, long time. So we were able to bring a lot of attention and users to the platform fairly easily. What's a bit more difficult is the real estate industry. The real estate industry doesn't really do community. The real estate industry does deals and they make profits. And if you win, I lose, and vice versa more often than not. And so that's much more challenging, but we're now seeing over the past few years, especially an increase in people inside real estate companies that understand that when it comes to issues like technology and prop tech as a factor of transformation and change, that things like community and collaboration and understanding are actually much more important than perhaps in the day-to-day activities of a real estate company. So it's an ongoing journey, and I think it's quite common that the early adopters are always keen to throw themselves into a community, and the institution, the establishment, perhaps not so much.
Fair, fair. So maybe just touching upon that topic, right? So it's super interesting that you mentioned that the real estate industry is just looking primarily to do deals and kind of like grow their business the way they've always been growing it. And broadly, there is an opinion in the larger tech community that real estate as a vertical is a laggard when it comes to adopting technology, right? Is that a statement that you would agree with?
I mean, if you've got any evidence to prove otherwise, I'd be interested to see it. Absolutely, I agree with that statement. It's as I alluded to, the adoption of technology is an outcome, an output of looking at an organization and considering how it can deliver a better customer experience, which in turn leads to questions about change and transformation. So if you're not thinking about your stakeholders as customers, as the real estate industry will be quite happy to talk about tenants, then you're not necessarily incentivized to undertake those change and transformation projects, and therefore technology adoption will always be something like, oh, there's something that will save me money over there, so let's have a look at that, rather than as an embedded part of changing an organization.
Interesting. We kind of like see quite a lot of people showing enthusiasm, but then it doesn't translate all the way across the organization, right? Is that something that you noticed as well? And if yes, is there something more that people can do internally within the real estate industry to further evangelize adoption of these solutions?
I think, like, my view on this whole issue, I find it really helpful to look at it from a bird's eye perspective, first of all, and I try to understand why it's important for certain people, why it's not important for others, and why that dynamic that you mentioned exists. And because what we do all day is look at how the procurement process and teams and people within these organizations are changing and growing, and the challenges they face, I think it's given us quite an interesting angle on the importance of doing it right, but also then why it goes wrong, or why it is likely to go wrong. And really, this is all a question of risk in our view, in my view. If we look at how PropTech has grown and how it has been bought so far, we have a tradition within the real estate industry, and that carries through to the PropTech founders who came from the real estate industry, of doing business with your little black book. So it's, who do you know? Who do you meet after work for a beer? What schools did you go to? It's all of those traditional ways of doing business within the real estate industry. And that's actually quite helpful within the real estate industry, because that does help manage risk. You're working with trusted networks and trusted people. Unfortunately, that does not work with technology. The first reason it doesn't work is that if you are minded to purchase a technology solution, that solution could exist anywhere in the world. I mean, we're using a piece of software here called Boomcaster. I don't know where Boomcaster is based. I don't know where their servers are, and I don't care. And you don't care, because it's the best tool for the job. And that is a dynamic that is an alien dynamic for the real estate industry, because even in a single city, you can find these hyper local businesses who get their materials locally. They use advisors locally. They only develop pieces of land in a certain area, and now all of a sudden you have this big world of opportunity, but also challenge. And when you put those two dynamics together, what you have is a real imbalance in risk. Okay, and my main thread on procurement of tech in real estate is about risk. And that's risk for the real estate company, it's risk for the technology company, and it's risk for the people involved in the process. So if you'd like, I can kind of dive into some of those risks and why this is such an important topic, and one which will undoubtedly become more pressing as time goes on.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little. Yeah. So what are the risks that companies get into?
Okay, cool. Well, let's start on the personal level, because ultimately when you're trying to sell your product, you're trying to sell product to an individual, a decision maker, or a group of decision makers, and they have a personal interest in this process. An individual inside a real estate company responsible for buying technology is taking a massive risk, because they are spending company money on a product that is quite likely new in an area of the business that probably hasn't either existed before or hasn't deployed technology. And there is a possibility that that product or the deployment of the product is not going to work. And at the end of the project, the technology will be deployed and the business will say, we're not getting what we expected to get from this project.
Right.
And I'm afraid that as a professional in a job, you don't get too many opportunities to say, I messed this up. So there is a huge personal risk for the professionals operating inside these real estate companies. That then, of course, extends to that organizational risk, because if the project doesn't work, the company has spent money and has not got any return to show for that investment. A real estate company, especially one that is reporting to financial markets or as a public institution, they are not going to be particularly well rewarded if they don't get it right. So the organization has a risk there as well. And actually, as an industry, not just individual technology companies, PropTech also has a risk, because you will not get too many opportunities inside real estate companies where projects don't work to continue to sell into those companies. We need, as an industry, to make sure that projects actually succeed, that they're delivered on time, on budget, and on specification, which means we need to work with those people who are taking those personal risks, and we need to help them on that journey also. So and this ultimately all comes down to the question of how do you buy technology effectively? Because if you buy it effectively, then at the very worst outcome, you will have an audit trail that says we did everything right, but it didn't work. Now, whilst you're not going to get sacked for buying IBM, as the old adage goes, you're also not going to get sacked if you followed a good process and you've got an audit trail. If you don't have an audit trail and you've got a bad result, then you've got some questions to answer. So all that we do with Unissu, as far as procurement is concerned, is about understanding and managing risk on both sides of the market, basically.
Interesting. So, but just to maybe put a question from the other side, right, especially around the point around risk, but that would be the same for any other industry as well, right? Any kind of an industry that's buying any kind of new technology, the individual and the company is still taking a risk, like trying and trusting a new company for that. So why should the process be any different with them?
You are completely correct, AJ, and the process should not be any different. The problem is that the process doesn't exist at the minute in the real estate industry. There are some fundamental challenges that real estate companies face when thinking about this question. One of the most common challenges that we face or that we see real estate companies face is the existence of a procurement team. And you've got a technology or transformation team who have identified use cases in the business, problem statements. They've decided what sort of solution they would like to solve those problems. And they go to the procurement team, and the procurement team say, what am I supposed to do with this? And they say that because they don't understand the market. They don't understand how to access the market. And they often, as a result, will revert to things like saying, here's a Gartner report, buy one of these. Now, that's just like the don't get sacked for buying IBM adage. If Gartner recommend it, the problem is that you can't just buy a technology solution from a recommendation in a report, because there's no guarantees whatsoever that it's actually going to fulfill the use case that you've got in mind. So you have this tension where the change team know, because they've done their research, they're spending analyst time looking at the market, looking at startups like HouseMonk or whatever, and they see this suite of potential suppliers, and then they have a procurement team that doesn't know how to contact those suppliers and doesn't want to really find a new way to do that, because they've got their tried and tested systems. You want 1,000 laptops, no problem. You want 1 million concrete blocks, no problem. You want roof tile windows, that we can get it for you, no issue whatsoever. Technology, bit kind of out of our wheelhouse, not in our area of expertise. So you've got this team who know that their existing procurement colleagues are not going to be able to help. You've got the procurement team who know the importance of good procurement, but can't actually apply that in this space. And in the middle, this gap where they're not really working together. What needs to happen is that someone from that change team, that's over here, needs to go and embed in the procurement team and help improve the way procurement works as well. But like, a lot of these organizations are big organizations, and there's internal politics and tension and roles and responsibilities and et cetera. So that's not easy. But you're exactly right. To your point, that process has happened in almost all other industries. Real estate is so late party. So it will happen, but it isn't happening fast enough for you, I'm sure, and fast enough for us either. Now, what's really interesting about the market for real estate technology and the purchasers in the market is that the visible purchasing is almost all being done by public sector bodies or bodies who are quasi-public, social housing, those kinds of things. Because not only do they have a procurement process, they also in most cases have an obligation to make that process a public process, which is back to that question about risk. Hey, listen, we put it out to the market, we made sure everyone had an opportunity to respond, and this is what happened afterwards. In real estate, that's not happening amongst private companies, happening amongst the larger ones, albeit with that the challenge between the two teams. But smaller organizations are still kind of, almost because they don't know any better, still going about buying things because of the black book. And so the answer to your question is absolutely, it shouldn't be any different. But in reality, there are practical challenges that prevent that from happening right now. My view is, without a shadow of a doubt, the real estate industry needs to do better. It needs to solve these problems, and it needs to run clear, clean, concise, whole of market procurement processes when it's buying technology. And you need them to do that as well, because if they come to market without a clearly specified brief, without a plan to put it into place, without appropriate sign-off and authorities and structure, they're going to end up buying the wrong thing, and it's not going to work. And then overall, the PropTech industry doesn't flourish as much as hopefully it will.
It's super interesting that you mentioned the black book, because that's something that we think about quite a bit as well. We normally do expect that a lot more in, let's say, emerging economies where business is like super relationship driven, compared to, let's say, like more developed economies where you would expect, like meritocracy to kind of like prevail, right? Like for so many reasons. But we time and again notice that real estate as an industry works fairly similar, irrespective of where you are, whether it's in the US or the UK or even in India. As you very rightly said, it's very relationship driven. It's very deal to deal, transaction to transaction. So that point kind of like hits home pretty well, right? Like with me, when you're, let's say, looking at PropTech, and especially from Unissu, which is like more of like a global platform as well, right? Like there's quite a lot of footprint in many parts of the world. Do you see any particular geography being a leader in PropTech adoption? Any geography over?
That's really, really hard to say. I don't have an answer to that question other than anecdotally my feeling are places like Southeast Asia, Northern Europe, being a little bit more savvy and a little bit more open to those things. And I ought to say as well, I'm not. The black book isn't a bad thing, and relationships don't go away. The point is that the relationships are kind of formalized in a sense. The relationships are managed under an umbrella of a process that everyone needs to participate in, and you will still put the relationship will still carry some importance in a decision making process, but if something doesn't work out and someone asks me why I bought AJ software and I say, well, it's because I went to the same school and we go for dinner once a month, it's not gonna, like, I can say all of that. I can say I know AJ, but I can also say AJ has applied for the project, has specified all of his use cases, we've got downtime, SLAs, all of those sorts of things, which is the same as everyone else has done. The fact that we go for dinner is just an extra element to that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's many years ago when I was raising money, one of the VCs, kind of made this point that, hey, like relationships don't scale. But I told them, hey, like relationships are hard to break as well, right? So on one hand, it's like tough to build these relationships, but then on the other hand, it becomes like very tough to break those relationships as well. And we shouldn't be so averse to saying, hey, relationship-driven businesses are not really that great. So that I kind of like see, I kind of see merit in that point, right? So when you're thinking in an industry like this, which works kind of offline and kind of like like relationship first, even if it's not relationship only, in an industry like this, how do procurement teams best market their requirements? Because there are so many PropTech companies everywhere, and fundamentally, like, things are cloud native and like SaaS focused solutions, so they could potentially buy from a vendor in any country in the world, right? So how do procurement teams do a better job at marketing?
Well, obviously, I'm very biased in the answer to this because Unissu is the go-to source for marketing your requirements to technology vendors. I think the first thing they need to do is they need to realize that they do need to market their requirements to vendors and not just say, here's 5 and let's have a look at them and get demos. Because what about the other 200 that you didn't get demos from? Risk. Those 195 that you didn't even speak to are a risk for sure, to some extent. The next thing is, well, you need to really consider what sort of questions you want to understand within the market, and the real estate companies need to get their heads around the fact that the technology industry moves so fast and companies mature within that they have to be able to engage with different companies in different ways. So, for example, a classic procurement process for a technology solution will be real estate company comes up with a problem statement from a business unit. They have an approximate idea of what outcome they want, but they don't necessarily have a specific way of getting that outcome. That's what they need to understand, is how can I solve this problem? So they would come to market with an RFI, basically a request for information, quite high level, and it will simply say, to more intents and purposes, how can we solve this problem? What does your solution do? Now, at that stage, again, the real estate company's bound to have some companies in mind. They can invite those companies to participate in that early stage, even if they have existing relationships. But they'll also invite the 195 companies that they don't know to say, this is how we would do it. And it happens all the time that in those proposals are solutions that they never even thought of or knew existed. Okay, so first stage, RFI, let's understand what's possible, really is kind of how I often think about those. And in that process, you start to build relationships for sure. Now I've got my list. I've probably got some criteria and I've shortlisted, this company's big enough, it can deploy, it can service in country, whatever, it's well funded, whatever it might be, my sort of like high level criteria. Now I'll come back to the market with an RFP, request for a proposal. And in this, I've got much more detail. I specified exactly really what I want. I've got my timeframes, I've got my budgets, I've got my users, my stakeholders, all of these things. And you're going to invite the same group of companies to respond to that RFP. Now, most of those that you've shortlisted from the RFI will respond, but something else is going to happen. And that is a whole new group of companies are going to be interested. Now, this is to the point that the industry changes. As technology companies get bigger, they get more sophisticated, they get better at dealing with their customers, and they start to really refine their sales process. Many large companies will not respond to an RFI because they will think things like that company's not ready to buy something yet. They don't really know what they want. They might think that they're not very well organized. They might just think, like, we will wait until that company has got the absolute intent, the statement of intent of an RFP before we'll respond. If you don't do an RFI and or you don't do an RFP, then you won't get that access to different types of companies. And I'm so happy when tech companies don't respond to RFIs because it means that they're getting a little bit bigger. RFIs often attract the attention of slightly leaner, earlier stage companies who may have an innovative solution but not loads and loads of track record or a big institutional bidding team to respond. So that's what I believe a really good process looks like. And at the end of that process, whatever you decide, whether it works or it doesn't work, as a person and as an organization, you have got an excellent audit trail to firstly minimize the risk of making a wrong decision, but at least being able to say, well, look, we followed a great process. And you know what? Sometimes things just don't work out. It wasn't my fault, basically. And here's the thing, AJ, here's why it's important for tech companies, because that company that has done an RFI and an RFP and then chooses you, you are going to go straight in there and you're going to know exactly what's expected. You're going to get the thing deployed as quickly as possible and you're going to have a much greater chance of success. And that's good for the technology businesses, even though it's a pain in the backside sometimes to go through a process that is much more involved than simply a black book conversation.
I think that's also an organizational maturity process for PropTech
Absolutely.
companies as well. Like quite rightly so, given the amount of competition in the market today, it should not be easy to sell, right? There are so many different solutions, like from so many different parts of the world. People are innovating really, really quickly. So if you want to be taken seriously by larger buyers, especially, you have to commit to a
You're
process, right?
absolutely
So,
right.
and doing the
You're
RFI,
absolutely
RFP,
right. And this is where we see people using I'm going to have to sell you a subscription to this after this call. But this is where our service really comes into its own, because the first thing that you're going to do when you have access to all of the sales leads that we provide is you're going to see how the buyers are going about the buying process. And you're going to learn from that how you are going to need to tool up and resource your company in order to bid successfully for those projects. That takes a while. That's not going to happen overnight. But the only way you can do it is by having the access to the information. And then you're going to start practicing. If we were able to agree that this makes sense, at least in theory, then we will also likely agree that it will happen more and more over time as the real estate industry matures and gets better and understands these problems a little bit more. Especially considering, like you said earlier, everyone else does it this way. Like every other industry, even the real estate industry does it this way for concrete blocks and windows and all of that stuff, right? So they're going to do it for technology solutions. And what we as tech companies need to make sure we are able to do is actually to engage with that and actually, where possible, drive that process, because it provides for better outcomes. And like you said, competition, it shouldn't be easy. It will take, it definitely helps improve the way the tech companies go about their business, and will help the ones who are better processed, better structured, and get better outcomes rise to the top. And I have these conversations like VP sales all the time. They're starting to see this black book. They're hired for their black book, and it was good at the start, but now people are saying we can't really do it this way anymore.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, just quickly going back to the funnel, right? Like of posting a requirement for an RFI, like going through the solution. Are there any funnel benchmarks that you can give on how many ideal RFI responses should you get and how many RFP responses should you get?
No, I don't
benchmarks that you
have
can
any. I don't think there is a perfect thing, because every use case and requirement can be different. What I can tell you is that when we run a project on behalf of a real estate company, which we also do in addition to searching the globe for other firms who are running them elsewhere, they will typically get an average of about 16 responses at both stages. So what happens before?
16 at RFI and another
Yes,
16
and
for
not
RFP.
necessarily, as I say, not the same 16 companies. You know,
Yeah, of
so
course, yeah.
what that funnel does is rather than sort of use your black book, a little bit of research, say right, here's 5 companies, let's invite them to demo. Where so you've basically hand selected a funnel of 5, and then you go from 5 to 1. In theory, at least, we'll take
Yeah.
that requirement to 10,000 companies, narrow it down to 16 in the first stage. Then it's not a narrowing, but 16 perhaps with different responses in the second stage, but with all much more specific responses and requirements. I think that 16 is probably a bit too many, and I think that 16 happens at that RFP stage because the requirements still aren't really specified in enough detail. And the real estate buyers haven't necessarily always decided what will be their red lines. This is a no or a yes or a no go as far as a tech supplier is concerned. So I think that will improve over time. And I think in an ideal world, by the time you get to RFP, you've probably got no more than 4 or 5 really high quality bidders responding with very clear proposals, and then it's a much easier selection process.
Yeah, fair enough. And are there any particular areas within PropTech buying that you're seeing more traction? Either on the
absolutely
side.
Access control is by far the biggest sector. After that, you're into sensors of various different types, occupancy, and so forth. And then sort of gets into quite a long tail. But what's interesting is what we see is very much skewed towards the public sector. So we don't see loads of public sector organizations being like, hey, get me some tenant experience apps or things like that. We see them occasionally. But I certainly perceive in the private sector that sort of requirement is much more likely. And here we have a perfect example of access control is very mature. The companies that supply the solutions can respond to RFIs and RFPs. The buyers are familiar with the space, so they're running good processes. And yet in the private sector, you've got this emerging technology called tenant experience with loads of small companies who haven't really got a track record. And yet the private sector saying, well, we'll just try and deal direct and we won't do a proper process. And it's just like, you don't need to be the smartest PropTech dog in the world to know that that's a really risky way of going about it.
That's interesting because I noticed both the door access as well as sensors are primarily hardware first and like software next kinds of industries. Maybe there's a trend there that the real estate industry is like kind of leaning or like warming up to hardware related technology first, and maybe eventually we'll find a softer landing in the software.
I think you're right. I think that there's probably a little bit of still not enough understanding of the hardware is often software agnostic, and actually the software is the layer that's the most important thing to get right, because that's where you're going to push your data around, you're going to get your insights, you're going to potentially find some competitive advantage, whereas a little piece of hardware on the wall is just going to do the same thing no matter what label is on it, to most intents and purposes anyway. But because we're just the way we think as humans, it's the thing on the wall that catches your attention and the eye, isn't it?
That's true. It's we're also like kind of like seeing quite a lot of chatter around sustainability. Are you seeing procurement happening to move towards this goal, or is it primarily just like lip service?
I don't really know the answer to that question, but you don't necessarily see the organizational motivation for buying something in a procurement exercise. Sometimes you will. My gut feeling tells me that there's bound to be a significant element of that involved, but I don't have any specific data to support it.
Fair enough. Eddie, I think we can keep talking like all day.
Oh, you can't. I'm afraid I've got about 5 minutes, and then I got to go to the airport.
I think we can kind of like wind it up right here. Like this was like super insightful. We speak to like so many different people on the other side, which is either on the PropTech side or on the PropCo OpCo side. but it was like super refreshing speaking to somebody like you who kind of like is building something in between. So as someone who understands both sides of the equation. So thank you so much for being with us here today. The insights were super useful, and hope to like have you again in a couple of years and like see how things have
Thank you
progressed
very
since.
much for the invitation, AJ. It's a pretty niche subject, but it's one I'm happy to shout about. And I don't know about if you've got dogs, but these dogs they instinctively know when a call is coming to an end, and they get all excited that it just must be like the pitch of our voices or something. So they're about to come over and start shouting at me. Thank you very much, and good luck with all that you're doing at the House Monk. And I appreciate you giving me a platform to shout about risk and procurement and things like that today.
And I find the topic itself so interesting. Whether the audience finds it useful or not, like I personally found it like super insightful, and I'm definitely going to make sure that my sales team listens to this like a few times, just so that they kind of absorb everything that has been.
I feel sorry for your sales team, AJ.
All right, Eddie, take care. Bye bye.